Next we have Ken Harbison. Ken and his wife Judy have been Adirondack members for more than 25 years. Ken has been a director for the chapter of the Maine Adirondack Club. He was a chair for the Adirondack Fall Outing when it was held here years ago. He was backup editor for the Genessean and participates at the Outdoor Expo. He received the Volunteer of the Year and High Summit Award from the chapter. Ken and Judy have climbed the Adirondacks 46, the Catskill 3500, and the New England 11 high peaks. They travel all over the world, and so tonight, Ken is going to share stories from his trip to Norway and Finland. Please welcome Ken Harbison while Steve is changing the computers. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to talk about a trip that Judy and I took just about a year ago to Norway for the Antarctic with Grand Circle Travel.
People are in the back, you're going to need you to speak a lot closer to that microphone.
Okay, let me...
It's very, some people have great difficulty hearing.
Okay. So here is a map of the trip with Grand Circle. So we came into Oslo, went across the country by a bus and by a very scenic railroad to Bergen, and then we boarded our ship that traveled all along the coast, all the way up to the North Cape. So we had 9 stops where we got off and walked around and other activities. Then we went into Lapland, Ivalo, and then we flew to Helsinki. So just a little background. Norway, a population of a little over 5 million. We can compare that with the Norwegian ancestry population in the U.S., and that's 4.5 million. Most abundantly in Minnesota, but also in the Midwest and on the West Coast. The area is about like Montana, twice Georgia. It is not a member of the European Union and it has its own currency. So, Norway and Finland have been in the top 3 of the happiest countries of the world for quite a number of years. In 2017, Norway was number 1. This year, Finland is number 1. For comparison, the United States is 19. A number of reasons for that. There's free education through college or trade schools, universal health insurance, and with very reasonable costs. The average cost is $1,100. Nobody loses their home in Norway or in Finland either. The salaries are really quite attractive. The starting salary at McDonald's is about $25. That's for a full-time employee. Unemployment is low. It's right around 2% this year, and it's been for a long time. The pensions, 80% of retirement income comes from state pension, and it's paid for now by payroll tax at a level that's not too much different from our payroll tax. But for the future, the system is not going to be able to support at that level. There's a lot of oil revenue now, and what Norway is doing is putting away the money for future pensions. So they have accumulated about $1 trillion worth in the oil fund, and they take out a maximum of only 4% of revenues each year, most of which goes to education. So Oslo, the capital and largest city, that was founded by Vikings right at the end of the Viking period. There's quite a lot of construction in the 19th century, very well done, very attractive and also very well maintained. So this Parliament building you can see, the government is a constitutional monarchy, king, and with the acting prime minister. One of the moderately recent buildings is the Opera House, which is enormous, 1,100 rooms, and it has solar panels to make use of the sun during the long summers. And one is invited to walk on the roof, and they hold activities there, so we walked around on it. The Oslo City Hall is very attractively painted, decorated, and that's where the Nobel Peace Prize ceremonies are held. One of the things which I was looking forward to very much was to go to the Viking ship museum in Oslo. Now the Vikings, so they were invading Europe into Russia, Mediterranean, from the 8th to the 11th centuries. And in particular, Rollo, may recognize the name, he was made Duke of Normandy by the King of France under the condition that he would stop attacking the French cities and protect those cities from other Vikings. So that was in 9/11. In the museum, here, there are 3 large ships and many small things. So this ship was 78 feet long, and a replica of this was made for the World Exposition in 1893, and it sailed from Bergen to Chicago. Yes, Chicago. Up the Hudson, up the Erie Canal, and across the Great Lakes. Another ship that was unearthed in 1904, so it's 71 feet long. On the lower left, you can see the water barrel and the rudder. And right above it, the very elaborate carving on, in this case, the stern. Here are some of the things which were recovered from the contents of the ship. So a bed, a burial sled, and the lower right, that's what's called the Buddha bucket. It's Irish manufacture, and probably it was probably captured in a raid in Ireland. A replica of this ship was made and started sailing in 2012, and under sail it reached a very respectable 10 knots. Inside the museum, this has this curved roof, and they use that as the video display screen all around. So the Vikings came to North America. Leif Erikson arrived probably in the year 1000, and he spent 3 winters in what was called Vinland, which is in an area there's now Newfoundland. It took a long time for people for that site, the site of Vinland, to be discovered. Ann Stinne, who's an archaeologist, and her husband looked at more than 60 suggested locations, and they finally found it in Newfoundland. And that's now a National Historic Site in Newfoundland. So here's a ranger at the National Historic Site talking about this is the location of a dwelling and a forge, and it was a 3-sided room, which was the boat repair. So this was excavated in 1960s, and then they reburied the site for future exploration. About a half-mile away, there was a reconstruction of the longhouse and the forge based on the measurements that they took. Another museum of interest was the Kon-Tiki Museum. Kon-Tiki was made of balsa wood from Peru, and Thor Heyerdahl sailed this from Peru almost 5,000 miles across the Pacific. He wanted to prove that it was possible for the Easter Island to have been populated from South America. And this is clearly a demonstration of that. And just reading recently, the DNA analysis shows that the descendants of the population have substantial Native American genes. Another boat that he built was the Ra 2, in this case, is made of reeds, and he sailed that from Africa to Barbados to prove that the Egyptians could have crossed the Atlantic. But one thing I should possibly mention is on Kon-Tiki, part of the water that he carried in pieces of bamboo. So I made large water containers, sealed bamboo, to show that it could have been possible to do it. He had food that is native to South America. You may not have heard of this sculpture, but a very, very powerful sculpture in Vigeland, because almost all of his works are in one park. The city of Oslo had the right of refusal for anything that he made in exchange for giving him a park for eternity. So here, kind of near the entrance, here's a monolithic pillar, 46 feet high. You will notice that the humans there are naked. And his logic was, if you put clothes on somebody, that immediately defines the era that they came from. But if they're naked, they can be of any time, forever. Here you see some of his granite sculptures, 126 of them, larger than life here. And the thing that you really notice right away is all the expressions, these marvelous capturing expressions of people, like this old man with his wife. There's a fountain, it's a bronze fountain, and it's surrounded by this huge maze. If anybody's interested in maze, if you look at it a little bit, you'll recognize that it's enormous. So here's some of the bronze statues. Around the fountain are the stages of life of man. And you can see how expressive some of his statues, this teenage girl. This is the most famous of the statues, the Angry Boy, it's called, because right across the walkway from it is the girl laughing at him. Quite interestingly, really in all of Scandinavia, it's virtually cashless. Banks have a sign on, no cash, no change made, no exchange. Cash not accepted in some places. Virtually everything is by credit card or on your smartphone. So here's the second largest bank abandons cash entirely. Now one of the things that immediately does is it pretty much stops thefts. There have been problems like in hotels and large stores. They have to hold a lot of money and often in multiple currencies. Well, there isn't any now. It's all electronic. It also means that there are complete records of things, so it is very hard to disguise income. So we traveled across the country to Flam. Some fields there, but agricultural land is only 2.7% of the country. So we get into the mountains, many mountains, and all of them seem to have waterfalls in them. 1/3 of Norway is above the tree line, and there are 291 peaks that are above 6,500 feet. And there are 1,600 glaciers on the mainland, plus more on the islands. And there are trolls around. This is one of the stops, a break that we took, and in the shopping centers and whatever, you see numerous troll statues. The ones nowadays are depicted as friendly, but in mythology they were not friendly to humans. We stopped at this stave church. Staving refers to the way that the boards are interlocked to provide the walls. So this was built in the 12th century, and it's the original wood, except for the floor, which was redone. And replicas of this church have been made in 3 cities, including Rapid City. Oh, I should go back. So this is our group, 25 of us, plus the leader is on the right. The decorations of it, since this was Christianity came just in right after 1000, and this was in the same century. So there are crosses on things, but also you can see the dragon motifs of the prior culture are up on the roof there. The church is made entirely without nails, with pegs, and with a lot of clever interlocking of pieces. And you can see the surfaces are just heavily carved. So our bus trip brought us into the town of Flom, population only of 350. Beautiful location. It's on a fjord, and it's the deepest fjord in the world, and it's the longest fjord in Norway. Now you will notice that there is a cruise ship on the right there. Typically three cruise ships come in each day, and they discharge 6,000 people into a town of 350. Now we saw none of it because they arranged that we arrived after the last ship had departed in the afternoon, and we got up and out early in the morning. So we didn't see the 6,000, 2,000 of them. There was our hotel. You can see the public areas are essentially all glass. It was very, very bright, very nice, and it had its own waterfall. So this is the famous railroad, and it's known as Norway in a nutshell. It passes through 20 tunnels, and here are some of the pictures. Three of them, as you can figure out, if there's something mentioned in the lower right-hand corner, it's somebody else's picture. But the one on the upper right is one that we took out of the windows. So we passed this road. This road was built in order to construct the railroad. It is now a very popular bike route, and it's a good 51 miles. There are, I think there are 8 switchbacks on it. Now, Kjosfossen waterfall, very famous waterfall. It's 305-foot free fall and 740 feet total. Now, the arrow there shows a ruin. So a few minutes after we arrived, this is what we saw. This woman suddenly popped up in a bright red dress and was dancing furiously. And then she would move behind something or other and disappear. And she would pop up somewhere else. And she'd dance there, and then she would disappear. And then she would pop up somewhere else. So she was a Huldra. She actually comes from the Norwegian ballet school. But the Huldra in mythology is the daughter of a troll king, and she would dance to try to seduce men to marry her and enter her underground kingdom. But she had a cow's tail, and when men saw that, they would be terrified and they ran away. The end of this section of the railroad is in Myrdal, so it's a climb from sea level of 20, and you can see how steep it is in some sections. Now, we were supposed to continue on another railroad, but the night before there had been a huge storm, and trees knocked down and cut out the power to the railroad. So we went back down the mountain and went by bus for the rest of the trip. So here's how would you like that as a nice footbridge? And so here's an older farm up on rocks and some new construction across the river. And that brought us into Bergen, so that's the number 2 city, about 250,000, and Mount Floyen is right above the river, right above the town, at 1,050 feet. This is our guide's apartment. She took us to that. Ava took us to her apartment. It's a basement apartment. All right, you think basement, well, what's that mean? High windows, little windows? No. Because of the slope, she had beautiful wide windows that overlooked the city and overlooked the harbor. So it was really very, very nice for a basement apartment. It was very nice. Along the waterfront, the floors are being raised in the building because this is built on fill, and there's some siding, so you can see the end of the large logs beneath it. But they, during construction, instead of having it ugly, they put these big printed sheets over the whole building. Because of the sinking, I was concerned. So here's one of the buildings that they propped up while they were preparing to work on it. Here is this, whatever you want to call it, carving. This whole area has traditionally, still continues, is very dependent on cod. There's a major spawning area in the Lofoten Islands, which we'll see shortly. Now, contrast to North America, where we fish out the cod, they have sustainable quotas. They do not overfish, so they will be doing it for a long time. We went to the Fishery Museum, which talked about the cod, but also about whales. And this was somewhat controversial. But the Norwegians hunt only minke whales. That's the most abundant species. And the IUCN, Conservation of Nature, lists it as of least concern. So you can see in the graph there, around 1990s, there was a total ban on whale fishing. But then, once the populations have been well defined, they've put in quotas, and you can see that, which are in blue, which the Norwegians have certainly abided by. So we went out to a fish farm. There are quite a number of fish farms in the oceans and in the fjords in Norway, and went out to see this one was a salmon farm. Now, this year, okay, this was very different. This year was the hottest June, and the ocean warming resulted in huge algal blooms, which came in and clogged the gills of the fish and suffocated millions of fish, salmon and others also. So we went up Mount Floyen by tram. And another troll. And they had a herd of goats there. All of them are named. Now, on our way down, we ran into a bunch of downed trees, because as I said, the previous night there had been this huge storm. So we had to negotiate those. And here's Judy is helping one of the others, because the downfall there had pushed us right to the edge of a very steep drop-off. So here is our ship. Hurtigruten is the line, which means express route, and it started out as a mail boat, and it continues as that. So ours was named the Trollfjord, and it's relatively small, 638 beds. And on the upper right there is what our room looked like, taken off the web. Large window. So here's the route. There are 34 stops that it makes, and we got off on 9 of them. So they have the asterisks. So starting at Bergen and going all the way up to Kirkenes in the north. So many of the coastal mountains, particularly in the middle of the country, are mountains that come right down to the sea quite steeply. No roads are there. You can see the red arrow. can see there is population along there. People have little farms. We did not go on this, but when and if we go back, I would very much like to go on some of the national tourist routes because they're so scenic. So here's one's called the Golden Route, and it used to be a bridle way. Little map of it, and you notice I marked that there's a ferry because being near the coast, there are various fjords that cut into the inland. There are over 1,000 fjords in Norway. So here's the ferry to take you across, to continue on the road, take your car across, and then there are these scenic outlooks that are placed at various strategic spots. And particularly the lower right is the one that overlooks the picture we just saw a minute ago. Aalesund was in the 19th century was a wooden city. There was a huge fire in 1904, and practically nothing was left. So it was rebuilt, but in the Art Nouveau style. So many buildings are decorated with the, floral themes and quite elaborate. Not our plain brick kind of things, and all stone. Under zoning, it has to be non-combustible. Rollo, there's a picture there mentioned before, the Duke of Normandy, and he is the great-great-great-grandfather of William the Conqueror. And virtually all European kings and queens are descendants of Rollo. So in one of the fjords, we explored this small village, population about 1,000. A little tender brings us in from the large ship. So here's a view on the upper left, when it's sunny, so a beautiful location. When we were there, it was quite foggy. So they have sheep around. There's a house here with a chalet, I think it's probably a better name, with a sod roof, and then a much older farmhouse, all raised on stone. Two things to get above the snow, and also to inhibit rodents. Another one. So here's you can see a farm there, and there's a cut through the trees. Well, the cut is for electricity, not for a road. The way you got around is by boat. Trondheim, that's the third largest city, and it's affluent. You can see the lovely homes in the foreground. And in the harbor there, they are raising some buildings. You can see particularly the one on the right. If you look carefully, you can see that there's 2 levels of posts. And it was said that they're being raised in anticipation of rising sea levels. This was interesting. The world's only bicycle lift. You get over your bike, and then you put your foot on this little station here, and press a button, and out comes a pedal and pushes you up the hill. It's a good 20% slope. It's free. Nidaros Cathedral, built by the Vikings, okay, and then rebuilt. The spire on it is 321 feet, very spectacular. The Saint Olaf was buried there initially, and there was a shrine to him. There's actually 3 shrines to him. So this is right around the year 1000. I should mention that the whole front of it is a series of statues of all sorts of things, both people and concepts. So here's 3, an interesting set. So on the left, that's Olaf the First, and he was the one who brought Christianity to Norway, and the bishop, Sigurd, was very effective in making it stick. So he was quite effective. Olaf II was called Saint Olaf, and he really finished it. He was very insistent that you convert. Now, you notice in the middle there, the bishop is holding a basket with 3 heads in it. The story behind that is that 3 of his nephews were missionaries, and they were beheaded in the process of proselytization. So the heads there, however, are not of his nephews, but they are the heads, they're images of the heads of the architects of the cathedral, with which the sculptor did not get along. So here he is, Olaf the second was canonized locally in 1031, and then in Rome in 1164. Let me go back. Okay, you notice he's carrying this very characteristic axe. Well, that axe is shown on the coat of arms of the current king, King Harald. So we're going north. There are ships going south. Hurtigruten ships. So this is one of our sister ships. Then we came to the Arctic Circle, which is crossing the Arctic Circle is a big deal. We got separation, some libation there, and King Neptune appeared with his horn. Then we came into the town Bode, or outside Bode, the Saltstromen. This is the largest maelstrom in the world. On the left there. Okay, it can be 16 feet, the hole can be 16 feet deep, can almost be 100 feet across. And on the lower right, well, you can get a adventure trip in a raft to see it up close. Well, when we were there, it was kind of in between, so we could see that there was a hint of a whirlpool, but it wasn't much. The Lofoten Islands. Okay, this is a very important part of history here. There is a World War II museum. It's a private museum run by this fellow who has collected things for all his life. Goes off to sales and estate things and whatever. And he kept it open for us late, since we had arrived late. And there are thousands of artifacts that he has, that he's collected, including even 140 German uniforms. So this is basically from the German occupation of Norway. So here's the history. During World War I, Norway was neutral. During World War II, Norway wanted to be neutral, but Germany and England both desired control of them, particularly for 3 things: iron, fish oil, and heavy water, which I'll get into. So the Germans invaded in 1940 in Oslo, and a commander, a Norwegian commander, saw the fleet coming, and he sank the lead boat. And that slowed them down enough so that the government could escape. The government and all of Parliament could escape, and they ultimately went to England. Denmark was a different situation. Germans came in on a Sunday morning, and by afternoon they controlled everything and had the king and all of Parliament. So armed resistance from the Norwegians lasted for 2 months, which is longer than any other country in Europe, but they were totally overwhelmed. Now, Quisling, you probably know that, because in English it's kind of a synonym of traitor. He was made a puppet prime minister, and so he issued edicts under the recommendations of the control of the Germans. So there were almost 400,000 German troops in Norway. The withdrawal started in 1944 from Kirkenes. So a raid in the Lofoten Islands, it destroyed ships and 3,600 tons of fish oil and petrol. Fish oil. Why fish oil? Fish oil can be used to make glycerin, which makes nitroglycerin, which makes dynamite. So there were 12 attacks by the British commandos. In March of '41, they captured the rotors for the Enigma machine, which the Germans used, the unbreakable code that the Germans used during World War II. And then in December, they captured the complete machine. And that made it possible for Alan Turing to break the Enigma code, and that made an enormous difference in the outcome of the war. Because the information, what they thought was private, commands, whatever, could be captured and transcribed and caught. Heavy water, I mentioned heavy water. Well, that was essential for the development of the atom bomb. And this was the only heavy water plant in the world at the time. And a commando group of the Norwegians attacked it. The Germans had protected the roads and the bridges, but they thought this precipitous cliff, nobody would ever come up it. Well, the commandos did. And they came into the back of the plant, they destroyed the heavy water equipment, and they dumped out 55 barrels of heavy water, which set back the Germans at least 6 months. Okay, Trollfjord, that's the name of our ship. So it's a narrow fjord in an island, and you can see the Hurtigruten ship just sneaking through near the entrance. And also you can see how steep the walls are. Now, we were there at night, and so I'm looking out the window, and the only way I could see, the only thing I could see was whatever was illuminated from the lights on the ship. So it's kind of important on history and also a certain mythology. Tromsø, moderate-sized city. And the Polar Museum is there. So Roald Amundsen discovered, who made it to the South Pole, first one to do it. And also he was the first documented one to the North Pole. Harry claimed he had gotten there, but in fact, when you look at his log, it would be physically impossible for him to go to the North Pole, but Amundsen clearly did so several years later. So the large museum, collection of and a lot of pictures and some other things, mechanical Victrola record player, because not electricity on it. So here's one of the towns in the North Cape, and you'll notice the avalanche fences. And we visited with a Sami reindeer, so we did indigenous, and his wife, and they have a little shop there. So there's part of his herd and a traditional tent. It's the North Cape. So this is the farthest north that you can get in Europe by car. There are islands to the north of that, and it's right on the edge of a 1,000-foot cliff. Here are some peace stones, and there are memorials to fishermen. In Kirkenes. So Kirkenes is the second most bombed city in World War II. Malta was first. So the Russians were bombing it every day, maybe 3 bombings a day. So they had dug air raid tunnels, and so when the air raids were detecting, people ran into this. It would hold 2,500 people. The problem was that there's not enough air for 2,500 people for very long, so they would have to rush out immediately as the danger had passed in order to let it air out. When the Germans were forced to leave, well, they had 100,000 troops in Kirkenes, and they destroyed everything. There was everything was burned down. Bridges were destroyed. Crops were destroyed. Mines were put on the roads. So here we go into Finland, into Lapland, the northern part of Finland. talk just a second about languages. So English is taught from the first grade in Norwegian. So English is almost universal in Norway. And when you get to the 8th grade, you need to take additional language or languages. And so Norwegian and Swedish and German and English are Indo-European languages, and you can see the relationships between a couple of these. Good morning and apple, 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 apple. So very similar. On the other hand, Finnish is Uralic, an entirely different class of languages, different alphabets and partly, and there's no relationship of the words to what they are in English or Norwegian in that same area. So the Lapland, a lot of lakes, and really very beautiful. So this whole area is Sami territory, the indigenous population. Traditional tent. And we visited with these Finnish reindeer farmers and had lunch there. And it turns out there are essentially no wild reindeer in Finland. They are all owned. They're in communes, and each of the reindeer are marked on their ears, and they herd them all together on a specific time, and then sort out who owns them. So it's a very interesting system. In order to control the population, they would breed like deer. Okay, so they can rapidly overrun any available capacity. So 40% of the herd is harvested every year. Now in the background you can see this. There's a male back there. He's just been castrated. He's not happy. But now, next year, when they herd him up, he will be put behind a sled and see how good he is at pulling a sled. And if he's good enough, he has 5 years employment at that. If he's not good enough, he's reindeer. Now, one of the reasons that we went there was the hope of seeing the aurora borealis. Okay, and it was cloudy in Tromsø, which is normally a very good spot. Well, on the day that we got a clear sky, we were in Ivalo, and here's the track of it, the green. So we were kind of at the edge, but definitely visible. The problem was that the intensity of the aurora was low there because of the prior sunspot activity. So here we have a graph on the bottom, and Ivalo, where the red arrow is. Okay, it's a 2 out of 9. If we'd been there 10 days later, we'd be over there where it's 6 in red. But this was the best picture that any of our group got. So it's clear that it's there, but it was not spectacular as it could have been a little bit later. Okay, so we flew down to Helsinki, the capital, largest city. 2 things: you see the cathedral there and the sky wheel. So it's like in London, for instance. Well, there are 2 of the carriages there. There are 2 cars that are distinct. One of them you can have champagne at, and the other one is a sauna. Used mainly by people on honeymoons. So the cathedral there dominates the sky almost. So it's evangelical Lutheran, built in 1852. 70% of the Finns are members of the church there, which is down from 85 in 2000. It's a state church, state religion, and also the Finnish Orthodox is a state religion. The original building here in 1868 was built, of course, by Russian Orthodox. In the middle of town, near the offices, okay, there is the Chapel of Silence, very quiet place. People come over the lunch hour in particular. Now, why am I talking about churches? Well, the churches provide the cemetery, virtually all of the cemeteries in the country, and they provide the social services. On the lower left there, there's kind of a black building on there. That's the social service thing for Oslo, or for Helsinki. And so one goes there for all sorts of service. There are no homeless in Helsinki. If you don't have a place to live, they will get you. Now, how do you pay for that? There's a church tax, as there is in Germany. And it's about 1.4%, and it's collected on out of your paycheck, okay, automatically. And then the churches then pay a fee to the equivalent of the IRS for that money. 70% of the people in Norway pay the church tax. You don't have to. You can say that I'm not a member. I don't want to be a member. And you can even file a form on the internet. But if you do, you can't be married and you can't be buried in the church. Sibelius, the most famous of the composers, and quite a large monument to him. And here's a sea fortress, one of the largest in the world. It's not used as a fortress now, and dates from the 18th century. The Russians took this over during World War I because it's the access to St. Petersburg. But it's being kept up, sort of basically for the future, but also for tourists. So here they are refacing it, refacing all the joints, and doing, so it's, they're not using the firing holes, etc. And that was our trip.